Many people are claustrophobic, and with good reason. The mere thought of being trapped in a confined space is enough to incite panic in even the most composed individual. Usually these fears never have any basis, but occasionally people's worst fears come true. From castaways to curious children, we're exploring the stories of people who got stuck in the strangest places. When Salvador Alvarenga, a 36-year-old fisherman from El Salvador, left his house in November 2012, he expected to be gone for a few hours at most. 438 days later, his fishing vessel was finally rescued after months at sea. It was soon after Alvarenga struck out in his tiny fishing boat that a monstrous storm hit. He and his assistant lost control of the ship's navigation and were blown almost 7,000 miles away from their original destination. The two men survived for months by catching fish and birds with their bare hands and drinking turtle blood, urine, and rainwater. "I was so hungry I was eating my own fingernails, swallowing all the little pieces," says Alvarenga. Unfortunately, Alvarenga's shipmate was not so lucky. He entered a delirious state after several months and refused to eat. After he passed away, Alvarenga kept him in the boat for a full week, continuing to speak to him as if he were alive. But finally, he had to face reality and pushed his partner overboard. When he was finally picked up by the Coast Guard, Alvarenga was socially starved and struggled to make eye contact with his rescuers. However, he lived to tell the tale, spending more time at sea than anyone in history. Harrison Okene was a cook aboard a tugboat based in Nigeria when tragedy struck. The boat capsized, killing most of the crew on board. Okene was lucky to survive in a 4-foot-tall bathroom that maintained a small air bubble. But for 3 days, Okene was trapped in this hellish space, with no way to signal for help and his air supply quickly running out. Experts estimate that Okene began to experience the first symptoms of carbon dioxide toxicity after about 56 hours. In the end, this usually proves more deadly than a shortage of oxygen. In the end, divers searching for bodies found his hand outstretched for help, and he was rescued, with only hours to live. The 29-year-old still has nightmares and vows never to return to the sea again. He's taken a new job as a cook on firm ground instead. Okene was the only survivor in a crew of 12 when the boat capsized. It still haunts him, but at least he escaped with his life. In 2010, the world's eyes were glued to a tiny mining town outside of Copiapo in northern Chile. This often ignored corner of the world garnered attention because 33 miners were trapped inside a copper and gold mine after a massive structural collapse. The mine, opened in 1889, had been the site of numerous earlier accidents, including an explosion in 2007 that killed 3 miners. Little was done to improve conditions before the mine was reauthorized for continued excavation by Chile's National Geology and Mining Service in 2008. After news of the collapse reached authorities, an intensive, highly orchestrated 69-day rescue operation was put into motion. Complications were numerous. There was another collapse, and for a while, all hope seemed lost. But after an ingenious drilling operation was devised, the men were hoisted up individually in a shaft barely wider than their shoulders. There was much rejoicing as they saw daylight for the first time in more than 2 months. Church bells rang out in Chile when the first miner was extricated, and Chileans were glued to their televisions throughout the night, proud of their nation's ability to save the men. Since then, the men have led a lawsuit against the mining company for more than $27 million. Window washing in New York City is not a profession for the faint of heart. These workers regularly scale massive buildings to keep up their appearances. Back in 2013, 2 window washers were following their daily routine, dangling around the 46th floor when a cable broke and they plummeted. Hanging by a thread by the 44th floor, they were trapped. Firefighters working inside the Hearst Tower, designed by Norman Foster to be one of the most environmentally friendly buildings in the history of the Big Apple, cut a hole into one of the windows on the 44th floor to bring the stranded men safely inside. And just to be sure, the window washers were attached to an extra safety harness lowered from the roof. While they had effectively lived through a nightmare, the men were thankful to escape with their lives. Additionally, the Hearst building is an epicenter for print media, so the event was extremely well documented, making the men famous for a day. Reportedly, they were right back at work the next day. A British father tragically died after he crawled into a rabbit hole and got stuck while out hunting with his dogs and ferrets. The man loved to hunt rabbits in his free time and was very experienced, making the incident even more mysterious. The tragedy occurred on New Year's Day 2015, and relatives were concerned when he failed to attend a celebratory lunch they had organized and raised the alarm with police the next day. His body was found by a member of the public on January 2nd, with his bottom half sticking out of the rabbit hole. He was at a 45-degree angle curved around the hole. There was a hand coming coming out of the hole in between the male's legs. I could not see the other hand," said a police officer. There were scratch marks on the ground. It became obvious that the man was deceased. The man was remembered fondly by his friends and family for his generosity and good humor. This is another bizarre one. Patrons of a cash machine in Corpus Christi, Texas thought that they were the subjects of a practical joke after pieces of paper with pleas for help came out of the cash slot in place of money. This went on for 3 hours before someone thought to alert the authorities. One handwritten note slipped by the trapped man to a customer said, "Please help, I'm stuck in here and I don't have my phone. Please call my boss." The message included the employee's phone number. The officers who arrived also thought that they were the butt of a joke, but sure enough they heard faint cries from within the machine. It turns out that an unnamed man was maintaining the machine when it locked on him. Unfortunately for him, his phone was outside, meaning that he needed to resort to handwritten notes to finally find freedom, which the police eventually offered him by breaking down a door. The man went on his way before the media could properly identify him. Back in 2012, a group of Brazilian inmates hatched a brilliant escape plan to bust out of jail. They used a metal pipe from their shower to smash a hole in the wall and slip out undetected. Unfortunately for them, one of the inmates was too big for the hole and became trapped. Because he was only the second of 4 escapees, the other 2 were trapped inside behind him. He was left with his upper body hanging out of the prison while he was trapped by the hole in the wall around his midriff. In the end, it was his own screams for help that alerted the guards to his escape attempt. He was rescued after firemen smashed through the rest of the wall and was then treated for a suspected fractured rib. When police returned him to his cell, they found a suitcase full of clothes in anticipation of his escape. Brazil has notoriously lax prison security. In the same month, 14 other inmates successfully escaped, but in many cases, this is due to widespread corruption. Prisoners can effectively buy their own freedom if they talk to the right guard. However, this has raised concerns because many prisons are near to schools. A 3-year-old Irish boy simply couldn't wait to win a toy from a claw machine in the small town of Tipperary. Jamie Bracken Murphy was disappointed not to win a toy as he played the notoriously difficult claw game and decided to climb inside in order to get his loot. Unfortunately, after scooting inside, he found himself trapped behind the glass, unable to get out. His dad said he was sitting with Jamie's 5-year-old brother Shane before hearing muffled complaints behind him. "I turned around and just see Jamie's face looking out from behind the glass. I wasn't surprised at all, really. He's a very mischievous, sharp kid who's always pushing boundaries. He was inside for about 10 minutes and was worried for maybe 10 seconds at the start, but then he just found it hilarious." The staff searched for a key while an off-duty fireman ultimately saved the day and rescued the boy. When interviewed, Bracken Murphy said he wasn't embarrassed or upset. In fact, he was ready to laugh at the absurdity of the whole ordeal. Many people have phobias of elevators, and these phobias are not unfounded. Especially if an elevator has not been properly maintained, it's not uncommon for the car to become stuck, but usually the jammed elevator can be easily restarted. Rarely does a car remain stuck for more than a day. That's exactly what happened to Nicholas White, a New York City production manager who was just going outside to smoke a cigarette. It turned out to be the longest cigarette break of his life. The elevator was stuck for a full 41 hours, during which time White had no food, water, or communication. His only sustenance was a pack of Rolaids. Rolaids aren't a very good meal, White said. The most difficult part of the ordeal, he said, was going 41 hours without water. At one point, White thought he might die of dehydration. He relieved himself by opening the elevator doors a bit and urinating down the elevator shaft. After the 41-hour nightmare, White received a settlement from the building. Unbelievable to many, he still takes elevators. In 2016, a Norwegian man had the distinctly unpleasant experience of getting trapped inside a public toilet. Cato Bernsten Larsen climbed into the toilet in an attempt to rescue a phone that his friend had dropped while using the toilet. The 20-year-old dived in feet first and stood thigh-deep in the contents of the toilet for over an hour as he waited for help. "I was obviously slim enough to get into it, but not slim enough to get out. I was down there for 1 hour, and it was very unpleasant," Mr. Larsen told a local news agency. The toilet is not connected to a sewer, and its contents are only emptied once a year. It took 4 firefighters 10 minutes to demolish the outhouse toilet, which is now out of service. "It was disgusting as hell. The worst thing I've ever experienced," he recounted to local media outlet VG, adding animals were down there too. Despite the unsanitary conditions, Larsen left in relatively good health. In a strange incident that nearly turned tragic, a 91-year-old French woman was trapped inside of a bank vault when the staff forgot that she was inside and locked the door. Her son became alarmed when he couldn't reach her for more than a day. The pensioner was left sealed in the high-security chamber in total darkness and without food or water when the BNP Bank in Rennes, Western France closed for the weekend. Because of her old age, it's a blessing she was not harmed. She was tired and thirsty, but otherwise in good shape and very polite, and very pleased we found her, said a police spokesperson. An investigation has now been opened to establish if charges could be brought against bank employees for negligence, the police commissioner said. A Hungarian man named András Thomas lost most of his adult life due to a clerical error. A young conscript in World War II, Thomas was relegated to a Russian mental institution because Russian authorities thought that he was speaking gibberish, when really it was his native tongue. His plight was not discovered until the late 1990s, when he was taken to a general hospital to be treated for high blood pressure and circulatory problems. There he had a chance encounter with a Russian doctor of Slovak origin, who recognized Thomas' words as Hungarian. The doctor did a little investigating. The Russian media picked up the story, and after about 2 years of bureaucratic fussing, Tomas was issued a Hungarian passport and discharged from the hospital. Of course, the damage had been done, but he's being treated as a hero in his native Hungary. Some people even call him the last prisoner of World War II. He's still adjusting to his new life in Budapest.